Oh, welcome, welcome. Oh, isn't this exciting? Isn't this our first salon of the year? Oh my gosh, what a great group. Some wonderful new faces and old friends, and thank you so much for coming. I'm Lisa Fox Martin, the chair of the Board of Trustees, our wonderful group of trustees, and my job is just to thank you for coming and to introduce Betsy Jacks, our executive director, who will introduce our wonderful speaker today. So thank you so much for coming, and I hope you'll come to the next 3 salons. I think Betsy will tell you when they are and what they're about. So thanks.
Hi, so welcome to the 2023 Sunday Salons. And I want to make a special thanks because this series was made possible by the estate of James Lewis and dedicated by his wonderful wife, Diane Young. So thank you so much for making this possible. So strangely enough, it's the 20th year of our Sunday Salons. I know, I was going to write the date 2003. I said, wait a minute, it's 2023. That's just, how did that happen? It's so quick. But I was wondering how many of you are here for the first time? A show of hands. This is so awesome. Look at that. Well, so 2 things. The Sunday Salons are where we present speakers who are particularly engaging. We don't like boring speakers. And we want them to present new topics in American art. What's next? Really forward-looking. And this one is definitely that. So it's once a month, January through April. And I don't have all the dates on me, but they're on our website. Also for people who are new, there is a tour of the main house that will leave from here at 3:30. So if you want to hop on that, just head to the back after this talk. So today, we are so thrilled to have Stephanie Sparling Williams. She is the Andrew Mellon Curator of American Art at the Brooklyn Museum. And she has a very long resume here and so many awards, even though she seems extraordinarily young to have such a long list. But she was featured at our Scholars Dinner last year and was so compelling that everybody clamored to have her come and give a real proper talk. So we're thrilled that she's accepted. And this year's Scholars Dinner is coming up on April 3rd. So it's your chance to see and hear from amazing scholars like Stephanie. Our staff in the back have letters about that Scholars Dinner if you'd like to know more. So before coming to the Brooklyn Museum, Stephanie was the associate curator at the Mount Holyoke College Museum and a visiting lecturer in art history in Africana Studies at Mount Holyoke College. Before that, she was the assistant curator at the Addison Gallery of American Art, a beloved institution near here, and was the John Walsh Fellow at the Yale University Art Gallery. So quite a nice list of institutions already. She's also taught art history at Phillips Academy Andover, the University of Massachusetts Lowell, Eastern Connecticut State University, and Mount Holyoke College. She's won numerous awards, including Center for Curatorial Leadership and Studio Museum Leadership Forum Award, the inaugural Mary Ann Unger Estate Fellowship, the Association of Art Museum Curators Mentorship Award, the Brace Center Faculty Fellowship and Gender Studies at Phillips Academy Award. So she's very awarded. She's also author of a wonderful book entitled Speaking Out of Turn. I love that title. Lorraine O'Grady and the Art of Language, which was awarded, there's a theme here, the James A. Porter Book Award. So today we're going to hear about her immensely exciting project to figure out how to represent American art at the Brooklyn Museum. And no matter what she does, it's going to be hugely influential on the field. Everybody will look to what you have done. So I'm excited that we get a sneak preview. Thanks for joining us. Please welcome Stephanie.
Wow, thank you so much. Betsy, for that warm welcome and that generous introduction. I'm just going to set my little timer here, just so I'm aware, keeping tabs. It is truly an honor, and I'm thrilled to be with you all this afternoon here in person, which is so lovely. I just want to take a moment to commend the staff and the board here at the Thomas Cole Historic Site for their forward-looking and inclusive work around such an important figure in the field. This is a really exciting place to be, and you all are just great, and just to be a part of it here is just a real treat. I also want to quickly thank and publicly acknowledge the essential support of the newly minted Dr. Caroline Gillespie, Assistant Curator of American Art, who is here, and she also works with me at the Brooklyn Museum. And I want to thank Grace Billingsley, Curatorial Assistant of American Art and Arts of the Americas, for their integral partnership in the work that I'm about to share with you all this afternoon, for their wondrous collegiality and divine openness and sense of adventure as we attempt to chart exciting new possibilities within the field and beyond. For those with an eye to the field and an ear to the ground, they are certainly two incredibly brilliant scholars in their own right. So please watch out for them. And I feel so privileged to work alongside them. Okay, I'm just gonna pick this up too. Zarina Shockley Sparling, my mother, was always speaking prophetically and didactically over my sister and me. For as long as I can remember, the words, "Don't let anyone steal your joy," was a cultural adage that washed over me in near daily benediction. While I grew up in a well-resourced and privileged environment, I was still keenly aware and often experienced through my mother the insidious and painful realities of racism and the deep and powerful act of resistance that is Black joy. My work as a Black feminist, art historian, and cultural theorist has been so thoroughly shaped by this woman who, like so many Black women, relentlessly chooses a sense of well-being and happiness in the face of overwhelming discrimination and oppression. As a leader for over 40 years in the healthcare sector, my mother led with hope and care against centuries of violent erasure and discrimination. And it is the kind of leadership, in my opinion, that I believe is so urgently needed in the museum field today, especially in regard to work with historical art and material culture. And I believe hope and care are also what is required in bridging the divide between previously marginalized American artists, craftspeople, and audiences, and these museum spaces that were quite literally founded and maintained on the erasure and exclusion of these same groups. It is a heavy history, but as I'm gonna argue throughout the next 30, 40 minutes or so, nothing is too weighty for Black joy. And here, I'm not talking about mere sentiment, but ontology. I'm not speaking of some thin theoretical valence, but rigorous and tried methodology. My talk today is really an ode to Black feminist curatorial practice and frames two propositions in the future directions of the Department of American Art at the Brooklyn Museum: joy and radical care. And they are two poles that ground and orient the reinstallation project that Betsy mentioned at the Brooklyn Museum's, in the Brooklyn Museum's 5th floor American Art Galleries, which is scheduled, and I hope you all will mark your calendars, for November 2024. However, in order to talk about the future, it is instructive, rather imperative, to revisit the past. A lesson really in Sankofa, and I've put the word up here on the board. It's an important West African concept about knowledge transfer that has historically resonated across the African diaspora, but particularly here among Black communities in the United States. The symbol of the Sankofa bird looking over its shoulder represents the need to examine the past in order to build one's future. Sankofa, to go back, to retrieve. Let me make a few connections. The genesis of the Brooklyn Museum can be traced to the founding of the Brooklyn Apprentices Library in 1823 by Augustus Graham, a businessman and philanthropist and one of early Brooklyn's most important civic leaders, who was eager to promote literacy and culture by, quote, forming a free repository of books, maps, pictures, drawing apparatus, models of machinery, tools, and implements, all collected for enlarging knowledge in literature, science, and art, end quote. It was out of this charter that the fine arts collection were later established in the mid-19th century and further catalyzed by Graham's vision. art in service of social improvement. By the late 1830s, the Apprentices Library Association embraced artistic training when it established a program of classes in mechanical, architectural, and landscape and figure drawing. And in 1843, the Apprentices Library, now settled in its new home in the Brooklyn Lyceum building on Washington Street, was reorganized as the Brooklyn Institute. That same year, the Institute held the second of a series of important early loan exhibitions featuring impressive selections of paintings and sculpture, as well as machinery, manufactured wares, and, quote, specimens of any unusual, ornamental, or curious works of nature and art, end quote. These displays were an impressive rival to the annual exhibition of the National Academy of Design in New York, and the art section of the 1843 exhibition was dominated by works of American painters, including our guy, Thomas Cole, Asher B. Durand, and William Sidney Mount. It was during the run of the 1846 annual that the trustees publicly announced their intention to establish the permanent Gallery for Art, quote, that would at all times be free to the public under proper restrictions as a means for refining and elevating the tastes for art culture, end quote. And to that end, they started inviting donations of art for the first time. The late 1940s were really the heyday of the early Brooklyn Institute and the founding commitment to education. And here I want to focus on the language that they used at the time, enjoyment, of the working classes was further championed. Classes and exhibitions were now complemented by progressive lectures. And the 1847 annual exhibition in particular drew both praise from the Brooklyn community and local press, and also accolades of a writer for the exclusive New York journal, The Literary World, who lauded his neighbors for, quote, a very commendable spirit in relations to the fine arts, and an earnest desire to distinguish themselves as separate and distinct from this whirlpool of a city, end quote. The author particularly praised the Institute's social spirit, adding that, quote, art belongs to the people. It is no luxury for the favored few. It is a boon for all mankind and may be enjoyed by all those who have eyes to see it, end quote. It was during this same period that Graham's founding endowment to support the acquisition of living American artists, a radical notion at the time, in his gift of American art that inaugurated the permanent collection at the Brooklyn Museum, or the then Brooklyn Institute, the first works were actually purchased or commissioned works by Daniel Huntington and Hudson River School painter Asher B. Durand. The latter, whose 1855 painting, The First Harvest in the Wilderness, represents both a not unproblematic landscape allegory of progress, but also a tribute to Graham's efforts as a cultural pioneer. Then described as ardent, radical, and progressive, and I can only hope and aspire to such description, and under the pervasive influence of the social reform and cultural uplift moments that swept through the United States for much of the antebellum period, Graham's bequest would fund works by living American painters for the new public galleries. It was through this early advocacy and support that Graham nurtured the Brooklyn Institute towards an optimistic embrace of art in service of social improvement, an ethos that has endured at the institution well into the 21st century. But before there were distinct curatorial visions and voices stewarding programs and exhibition towards these ends, the Institute's social spirit was cultivated by a group of progressive trustees who collaborated on the institution's ambitious lecture courses and exhibition program. During this time, a parallel phenomenon emerged into the cultural landscape, referred to as the Brooklyn feeling. I love that. In the second half of the 19th century, this curious phrase emerged from the review pages of the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, commonly invoked alongside statements of Brooklyn pride, an exemplar of Brooklyn exceptionalism. It is apparent across these early references that the borough enlivened a uniquely democratic, class-defying, progressive ethos filled with family-oriented, everyman types, and this feeling seemed to have encompassed this prevailing ethos, this way of being in New York specifically at this time. In several instances, this Brooklyn feeling directly references the Brooklyn Institute, and American art scholar and esteemed former Brooklyn Museum curator, Teresa Carbone, includes one such reference in one of her many important histories of the museum. And I'll just note that these important essays have been key to bringing our team expeditiously up to speed in the past few months. And for those who are interested in a more in-depth and meticulously researched and thorough account of the Brooklyn Museum's American Painting and Sculpture Collection's early history, I cannot recommend Carbone's writing enough, so please check those out. Regarding this Brooklyn feeling, one reviewer wrote effusively about an 1845 the opening night festivities. Quote, "We visited the rooms of the institution last evening and were exceedingly gratified, not only with the entertainment, but also with the very large throng of citizens that we found in attendance. Had the intrinsic merits of the exhibition proper been less than they were, it would still have been an ample reward for the trouble of visiting it to witness so much of that subtle element called Brooklyn feeling." Here, I want to just pause and link the notion of a Brooklyn feeling, this sense of wonderment, cultural pride, and progressive inclusivity, to our current departmental focus away from objective display of arts and disseminations of information to passionately revisiting and cultivating something akin to this historic and distinctly Brooklyn sentiment, an experience of joy, delight, amusement, a sense of wonder upon entering the American galleries in particular. So it'll come as no surprise. I'm going to trace a little bit of the curatorial legacy and some of the shifts in collection display over the years before I move into some future directions. But it won't come as a surprise to this group that collection building and display are inextricably linked to the institutional vision and the individual interests and priorities of each successive curator. In the last 30 years, there have been just over 30 curators dedicated to stewarding the American Paintings and Sculpture collection in particular. And the American collection really began to grow more vigorously after 1900. The work of artists such as John Singer Sargent and Winslow Homer were early collecting pillars across several curatorial tenures, with the first acquisitions happening in 1909 under William Henry Goodyear. Through the teens and 20s, the museum maintained a dual interest in early American painting and the more recent art of the Gilded Age in early 20th century. It was during this time when the museum accessioned its very first painting by Thomas Cole, Ruined Castle and River, circa 1832. Additional Sargents and Homers also came at the end of Goodyear's tenure in 1923, along with works by Mary Cassatt and Childe Hassam. And more Sargent and Homers still came in 1928. So you can begin to see how the early focus or priority, how this early focus or priority shapes collection growth across several decades. And in the case of Homer and Sargent, also in dialogic relationship with the Academy and the New York art market. Through a series of evolving priorities and acquisition and display, the Brooklyn Institute and later the Brooklyn Museum, not unlike other large institutions in the field, saw several transformational shifts that would shape how Brooklynites and the institution's wider audiences would come to experience American art. Leaders in the 20th century, such as Philip Newell Yates, concentrated on making the museum a leading fine art institution. In this moment, curator Herbert Schutte accessioned the museum's second painting by Cole, an intimate study for the cross and the world, painted between 1846 and 1847, and I don't have to tell you all this. You're very familiar with this wonderful work. Yates was also passionate about offering the public a superior education in the arts and reinstalled the museum's collections, quote, so that the contents of the museum will be presented to the public in an orderly panorama of various fields the collection represents, end quote. It was at this time when the collections were distinguished into departments and grouped in their displays such as medieval art, Renaissance art, and contemporary art. Quote, without such an arrangement, Yates notes, a museum is likely to be either a dead storehouse or a mausoleum containing a series of private memorials. It's very serious words. Okay. They haven't gone back to that since. We've moved on from that. Curators continued to rearrange the gallery spaces through the 1930s. For example, a general reinstallation of the museum's contemporary paintings and sculptures separated the various schools and periods more clearly, and another iteration, sculptures were reinstalled chronologically, and American oil paintings were reorganized again with separate sections created for the Impressionists and the Munich School. Upon first glance, these shifts really appear to us most quotidian and unremarkable. However, at the time, just as they are today, curators were experimenting with the very organizational logics for which we have still come to experience the museum's wide-ranging collections. Under the leadership of John Barr in the late 1930s and early 1950s, Barr, an American art history scholar, strengthened the American collection through important acquisitions in 18th and 19th century North American painting and sculpture, including the addition of even more still works by John Singer Sargent and Winslow Homer. And during his tenure, Barr also organized a series of very well-received exhibitions of 19th and early 20th century artists such as Eastman Johnson in 1940, William Sidney Mount in 1942, the Ashcan School 8, 1943 through 4, and installed extensive surveys in American art, such as America, 1744 to 1944, and an ambitious show covering 50 years of American painting titled Revolution and Tradition, on view in 1950 to 1952. When our third Thomas Cole painting entered the collection, our very popular View of the Two Lakes and Mountain House, Catskill Mountains, Morning, painted in 1844, which was likely acquired right out of the Revolution and Tradition exhibition. The earlier show drew from the museum's permanent collections to include paintings, sculptures, prints, drawings, furniture, decorative arts, costumes and accessories, books and fashion, illustrations and sketches, and really blurred the lines between fine art and popular culture and enlivened the visitor experience with immersive displays that you can see on the screen. Quite wild. In the latter 20th century, the department devoted renewed attention to overlooked developments in American art. Since that time, it has also been at the forefront of efforts to reimagine the canon through acquisitions of works by African American artists and by women, which remains central to our collecting efforts today and has been expanded to include the art and cultural production of Indigenous Americans, early Latin Americans, Asian Americans, and Pacific Islanders, all of whom were making a life in the Americas during the 19th and 20th centuries. In 1961, Axel von Saldern followed John Gordon's tenure as curator, and like many of his predecessors, he emphasized American art in his collecting policies. He noted that the greatest strength of the department lies in its collection of American painting, and in his assessment, quote, "It was through the judicious selection of previous administrations that it ranks among the best in the country," end quote. Von Saldern also invested in the improvement of the collection galleries to enhance the experience for visitors. Chief among the changes was a new labeling system, whereby in addition to individual identification labels, the gallery walls featured for the very first time introductory panels describing context and often the historic periodization of groups of artworks. So you can see these are new, and then these, you can't really see right here, are these panels that are introduced into the gallery at this time. In addition, he transformed the visitor experience by creating greater accessibility to the works themselves in the removal of the ropes and rails that you see in a lot of our earlier pictures, that they previously had kept the public at a distance, and he replaced them instead with less restrictive footboards on the bottom, or right up next to the paintings. So this was also quite a huge shift. In the gallery experience, this gallery experience continued to be innovated into the 1960s when the new study storage gallery opened on the 5th floor, which allowed visitors to view a large section of the painting collection on moving racks. Furthermore, this groundbreaking exhibition, Listening to Pictures, was installed in 1968 to provide greater context and accessibility around the modern art coming into the collection. As you can see, headphones were provided in front of each artwork, and audiences could experience the work while listening to interpretation from the artists themselves, a cutting-edge archival resource that lives on to this day in our special collections. The period of the late 1960s and early 70s saw a time of social and political upheaval and change in American society. It was also when our final and perhaps most dear to this group, oil painting, came into this collection, A Picnic Party, painted in 1846. And I believe this holds some significance around a particular festive gathering that was hosted at the site for many years. And at the museum, I think my slides were slightly out of order, a forward-thinking orientation towards previously underrepresented and marginalized communities aided in the expansion of subjects and themes deemed acceptable for exhibition. In 1969, in particular, the museum hosted this Harlem Cultural Council exhibition, New Black Artists, which exposed visitors, many for the first time, to an entirely new group of living artists. In acknowledging the cultural significance of recognizing these artists and the value of their work, curator Edward K. Taylor described the show as, quote, really only a beginning, a hint of uncovered ground and a new area of exploration, end quote. In the years to follow, more shows featuring Black artists and the interpretation of works by African American themes came or were curated by the museum. And I'm just going to show a few more examples of this. I think I'm going the right way. So Facing History was another example, the Black Image in America, 1710 to 1940. I think some in the field forget that there are these longer legacies of these shows that are coming back around now. We're starting to see another concentration this moment of figures or explorations of the Black figure in historic art. In a similar vein to African American artists, women artists also went largely unrepresented across the museum world, and their absence was also reflected in our collection. Despite this lack of visibility, the National Association of Women Painters and Sculptors exhibited at the Brooklyn Museum as early as 1928, and a very small number of women were featured in one-artist shows, such as Bessie Potter Vanneau in 1913 and Dorothea Dreyer in 1925. In the 1970s, with the help of several important donors, such as Edith and Milton Lowenthal, we received a gift of significant Georgia O'Keeffe painting, Ram's Head, White Hollyhock Hills, New Mexico. And the museum was, starting to really evaluate women artists more seriously in this moment. It also brought in 1977 a retrospective Women Artists 1550 to 1950, organized by the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. And during this time, the department also organized large reinstallation projects of the fifth floor galleries. So reinstallations were constantly happening, especially in the American Paintings and Sculpture Gallery, and they were updating at this time in the 1970s, their educational approach. The installations were arranged and rearranged chronologically with works grouped by topic and style in this instance. And as curator Sarah Fonce wrote, quote, "The gallery as a whole will have no single target audience in that it will provide the best of American art collection in this period in a well-lit, comfortable, and attractive setting for all visitors, whether they be serious students or casual visitors." From the late 1980s onward, the department continued to expand its collection, renovate its gallery spaces, offer important original exhibition, and it saw also a dramatic shift away from the legacy of male leadership and the rise of successive women leads of the department, such as Sarah Fonce, Linda Ferber, Barbara Milstein, later Barbara Galati, and Teresa Carbone. Coincidentally, the department has since been steered exclusively by women, and on an excellent course, I might add. Today, the collection is not only foundational to the Brooklyn Museum and its history, but it also ranks among one of the leading surveys of American art in the world. Our holdings consist over 1,000 paintings, 250 sculptures, and approximately 6,000 works on paper, which provide an impressive and albeit traditional overview of American art from 1720 to 1960. It truly is a trove. And I'm going to share with you one more special project in this history. I know that was quite fast and quite a lot of history to track before moving to future directions. But I want to note of particular Teresa Carbone's and Barry Harwood's milestone installation that many of you have probably seen or are familiar with, American Identities, A New Look, which opened in September of 2001 and moved beyond traditional collection boundaries and constraints of chronology and medium. The installation was organized around a framework of 8 themes, some based on time periods, others based on more general subjects. The color of the gallery walls changed throughout, along with large text panels to signal each new theme, some of which also offered quotations from artists and historical figures. As you can see, comfortable living room style seating was also provided in each of our corner galleries. In 2016, the 5th floor galleries were completely overhauled again, returning the spaces to a largely chronological display that explores particular themes related to American history and nationhood. The upcoming 2024 reinstallation of these same galleries will likewise present a collaboration between collections and will move beyond geopolitical boundaries to look at American art hemispherically as well as cross-temporally. There will also be a renewed effort to provide comfort and care to our visitors within the installation, which I will touch on more in a moment. And finally, like Carbone's presentation, the new reinstallation will return to bold design that is fresh and responsive to our contemporary moment and its trends, with the aim of welcoming and delighting our visitors. Okay. Coming to the latter portion of my time this afternoon, I want to take a brief moment to just kind of recap. I just covered a lot, and we have traced a significantly abridged history of the Brooklyn Museum, starting with the Apprentice Library and then the Brooklyn Institute, from a founding vision of art for social improvement cultivated through open and free access and an earnest desire to reach across class to entertain, educate, and uplift the lives of Brooklynites. We then moved into a critical period of collection stewardship where we saw the Department of American Art distinguished and codified, and a successive line of curator-led exhibitions, collection building initiatives, and innovative collection displays. Today, the museum as a whole has been dedicated to a set of social impact strategies, which were established through the forward thinking of the Brooklyn Museum's leadership to connect new and longstanding audiences with target issues such as climate justice and mass criminalization in ways that inspire action. In our exhibitions and collection displays, these social action directives offer the nurturing institutional structure curators often lack to really do transdisciplinary, critical, and justice-oriented work, while also seeking out feedback and partnerships from the very audiences we hope to connect with and serve. And I hope that I've made it apparent that it is this Brooklyn Museum history and the foundation that was really laid in the tenures that I've kind of outlined. They've really laid this groundwork, they've built the essential structures, and established the key scaffolding in the present moment for a vision like mine, the one I'm going to share, to be built in this space with such a large public-facing collection and institution. The philosophies and approaches that I'm going to share with you have, largely been embraced and well supported by our director, Ann Pasternak, and our senior curatorial leaders, Sharon Matt Atkins and Catherine Futter, whose own feminist, community-focused, and liberation-oriented practices have served as key interlocutors for my own. And I certainly do not take this for granted. So understandably, some of you are likely asking, as I often ask, why Black feminisms for American art? And what exactly is this vision? And what does rigorous joy look like? What does it feel like? I got you. I'm going to take it back to move it forward. Sankofa. In 1977, the Combahee River Collective, a Black feminist queer socialist organization active in Boston, released their now canonical statement outlining their position, politics, and core coalition-building philosophies, ushering in a new wave of Black feminist and third world organizing. While members worked across many sectors, mostly in literature and culture, their main focus was pursuing rights and access for Black women, arguing for a liberated and self-determined social and political order that relied on and was inextricably linked to Black women's liberation and empowerment, basically asserting that if and when Black women are free, and all men and all people, for that matter, must be free. For decades, starting first during abolition and through the civil rights movements in Black Power period, Black women fought passionately for the rights of Black people, only to struggle against the patriarchal domination and exploitation of their movements. Similarly, Black women championed major feminist advancements and causes, only to be excluded, ignored, silenced, and disregarded by the white feminist movements. So Black feminist discourse really emerges and exists at the intersections of interlocking systems of exclusion, erasure, and oppression, and Black feminist theory and methodologies does the work of imagining and creates the tools necessary for liberation. So that's just a quick little background of where these approaches are kind of welling up from. And I want to share an excerpt from that statement. I'm going to read it twice, so bear with me in a little kind of exercise of curatorial philosophy. The most general statement of our politics at the present time would be that we are actively committed to struggling against racial, sexual, heterosexual, and class oppression, and see as our particular task the development of integrated analysis and practice based upon the fact that the major systems of oppression are interlocking. The syntheses of these oppressions create the conditions of our lives. As Black women, we see feminism as the logical political movement to combat the manifold and simultaneous oppressions that all women of color face. Now, I would like to reread the statement to you again, taking some major liberties that I hope will illuminate in the most concise way possible how a curatorial approach grounded in Black feminist practice is oriented and might take up a set of distinct tasks within our field of American art. And today, those tasks are really collection building and collection display. The most general statement of my practice at the present time would be that I am actively committed to struggling against racial, sexual, heterosexual, and class oppression and exclusion within permanent collections and museums more broadly. And I see as my particular task the development of integrated analysis and curatorial practice based upon the fact that the major systems of oppression in and outside of the museum are interlocking. The synthesis of these oppressions and cultural erasures creates the conditions, experiences, and aesthetic products of our lives. As a Black woman, I see Black feminism as the logical perspective and approach from which to combat the manifold and simultaneous oppressions, exclusions, and erasures that all women of color experience within cultural institutions and in relationship to permanent museum collections. Now, I can appreciate that me locating and naming this might sound a little weird, might feel a little uncomfortable for many, because we're used to operating in the field under the guise of objectivity and under the protections of universality. But the truth is that American art museums and collections are already oriented towards and have been designed for white, European American social, emotional, and cultural thriving. And my approach to this work asks the field the question, what spaces oriented towards the social, emotional, and cultural thriving of previously marginalized communities might look and feel like? How might these spaces function? I want to take for a quick thought exercise the question of how Black women, since we're talking about Black feminisms in particular, come to see and experience and know Thomas Cole's work, for example, in a way that feel distinctly resonant. In what context might a Cole painting be displayed to promote greater access and enjoyment? I can appreciate the teams here at the Thomas Cole site and how they've begun already asking themselves these questions for years, and I commend them for their work into all of the individuals, particularly in the last few years, who've lived and worked on this property at the time Cole was making his work. I want to commend and also celebrate their Women in the Landscape initiatives in this most recent season. This is also the work. And this reinstallation and this project is really having me question whether or not we can push these pursuits even further. Is there a way to cultivate a joy-filled and meaningful experience in the absence of the Black figure, in this case, or in the absence of women? And I'm thinking here about framing. So how you frame the story changes the story. And the Hudson River School, like in many museums, but especially in the Brooklyn Museum, has had a hugely important role in place in our collection galleries as well. Currently, our landscape galleries are installed almost primarily with Hudson River School canvases, gorgeous canvases. And I just recently installed a Grafton Tyler Brown painting, he was an African-American 19th century landscape painter painting in the Pacific Northwest. And I installed him in this gallery because that's where it made the most sense, because he's a landscape painter. But he doesn't really have, the same kind of relationship to the Hudson River School, or Hudson River School landscape styles, lineage. It's so pervasive in our field, and we often frame most landscapes with regard to this first, landmark school of painting. And I wonder what it might be like to, instead of framing the marginalized, the historically marginalized practitioners, artists, mediums in relationship to pre-existing canonical frames, what would it be like to take Cole's painting and reinstall it in a frame, perhaps, that's organized through Sankofa, for example? Or how might we understand Cole's picture as it relates, or in relationship to Negro spirituals, for example? Just a provocation, just kind of a thought exercise that I've been working with. And this, of course, leads me to a larger conversation about representation, which requires a small caveat as we go through the images that I'm about to share. In these next slides, the reproductions of collection works are used to offer a decontextual preview, some further thought experiments with several of the frameworks that are going to be organizing the 2024 reinstallation. The specifics of these frameworks are not yet ready for public dissemination. This is actually my very first public lecture in this role, but also as a curator whose plans have been approved to move forward. So this is all that I can share with you. But I'm not going to be sharing any more details on the specifics of any given section. Rather, the juxtapositions that you see really simply serve as placeholders for ideas. That said, they also do not reflect the format of the specific display of any object. So this is just a little caveat. But I can give you a sense of what the American art spaces at the Brooklyn Museum will look and feel like in 2024. But first, I want to acknowledge that I'm not alone. These are field-consuming queries, and I have the tremendous support and collaboration from my colleagues whose own expertise and deep knowledge of the collection is what makes a transformational shift like this in our framing possible. Currently, the rubric for American art display at the Brooklyn Museum is experiencing a shift from a focus on 19th and 20th century paintings and sculptures to a historically significant and hemispherically oriented collection of extraordinary artworks culled from across more of the museum's departments. Similar to the approach taken in American Identities, this display will pull from decorative arts, Native American art, and arts of the Americas, adding photography and works on paper, modern and contemporary art, and works from our Asian collection, where several of our works by Asian American artists are held. In 2024, the fifth floor galleries will comprise art and material culture of the Western Hemisphere from 4000 BCE through the contemporary moment, with a focus on historic pieces made by creatives across diverse nations and cultures before 1960. This more capacious header will bring many important works out of storage and will provide fresh context for our many well-established and historic favorites like our Thomas Coles. Organizationally, the 8 galleries within this reinstallation will be dedicated to frameworks, as I mentioned, and these frameworks promote a range of experientially driven encounters with the collection. These framing devices prioritize feelings of joy, wonder, and curiosity, particularly in communities that have been previously marginalized in the field of art history and museology. Shifting the focus from Euro-American-centric canon building and rebuilding, or revision, and restating, and reframing, the frameworks organizing each of the galleries inspired by the frameworks organizing each of these galleries are going to be inspired by the rich contributions of Black and persons of color, thinkers, and cultural producers, representing a concerted effort to systematically center more voices and perspectives, even in the absence of parity of artists and subjects within the collection. And related to representation, I believe that one of the central innovations of this approach is that representations of previously marginalized cultural producers will extend beyond static representations of the body to include cultural contributions such as music, poetry, dance, as well as contributions in the realm of ideas and cultural sensibilities. These frameworks are thus vernacular, intersectional, quotidian, and varied, and I'm confident that they will also open up meaningful connections to all audiences. So this is the work of Black feminist curatorial practice, and this perhaps is my ode. It is re-examining our formulas for inclusion and complicating neat or tidy narratives. So often our desire for more stories keeps us steadfast in the chokehold of historical and relational hierarchy, as narratives are so often vehicles for the reproduction of particular ways of looking at the world. Everyone loves a good story, and I do too. However, it feels in this moment that stories presented in museums, no matter how complex and open they may be presented, are always bounded and nearly always reproducing particular ways of seeing and knowing. They have to be, right? That's legibility. That's how we read stories. This reinstallation interrogates our desire for stories. Black feminist curatorial practice is adding more works by Black Americans and by women. It is also hiring a senior fellow in Asian American art to co-develop essential strategies for the meaningful inclusion of diverse Asian American and Pacific Islander artists in our collection and display. So these are some of the things I've been up to the last year. Black feminist curatorial practice also looks like working vulnerably with an advisory committee to do the difficult but necessary work of collection and storage assessment. It looks like working with focus groups, which is what our team has done. It looks like establishing a Black feminist roundtable to help bring the approaches behind each framework, which have been largely untried in framing historic art for publics in their most rigorous potential. This practice also supports the hiring of a curator of Indigenous North American art, which is what we're in the process of doing right now. And especially to steward those important collections that have been included in these past displays, but most importantly to advise in their inclusion as we move into the future of this project. In the display of American art and the American art collection at the Brooklyn Museum, Black feminist curatorial practice looks like troubling the water. It looks like exploring ideas core to Western thought and American identity, such as the Black-white binary and notions of exceptionalism and abundance. Black feminist display looks like giving artists their flowers. It also looks like reframing the body as a site of pleasure, resilience, and agency. It looks like rebuking assumptions about the galleries as spaces for only quiet reflection by filling them with presence, sound, and color. It is creating spaces for rest. And finally, in this practice, I will continue to enhance the collection, of course, through important gifts of European American canonical figures. However, the lion's share of the department's time, resources during at least my tenure at the museum will be directed to the continued expansion of our holdings of works by Native Americans, African Americans, Latinx artists, and diverse artists and craftspeople from Asia's diasporas across the Americas, and of course, women. Oriented as we are as a department towards Black feminisms, the department will be especially attentive to the ways our collecting and display efforts are further amplified as we explore cross-cultural exchange and connections across race, class, access, training, region, religion, gender, and ability, among all of the other things that set us apart and bring us back together. So you still may be wondering, and I'm shortly going to close with my last proposal of care, but you may still be wondering, what does Black joy have to do with any of this? And the answer is simply that my desire to focus on and practice rigorous joy, prioritizing the experiential, really emerges from a deeply held belief that the people who have been the most marginalized in museums and their collecting and display practices deserve to feel a sense of wonder and inclusion that runs deeper than a sprinkling of artworks across galleries, still framed and dominated by the visual idioms of their past exclusion. Which is why I'm interested in exploring the boundaries of representation through these frameworks that center the cultural contribution and historical perspectives of Black people and people of color. And that work is to reorient historically white spaces towards representations that extend beyond the body and its visual products, while at the same time reorienting Black people and people of color to galleries and collection objects away from the position of marginalized and previously excluded other, and to the position of affirmed, validated, seen, heard, and celebrated interpreters of American history and culture. As an art museum, the Brooklyn Museum has historically been a site for cultivating beauty, and I remain committed to the power and pleasure in the aesthetic. However, what does one do when beautiful objects are entangled in ugly and often violent histories? How do collecting institutions invite new definitions of American art that sustainably challenge the legacies of erasure and exclusion within our very understandings of what is America, along with narratives of U.S. national history and identity? And finally, how should historical art and significant culture be experienced at this moment? The latter is a question my predecessors were certainly asking as they too made decisions about what shaped the experiences of art within the galleries in their time. The removal of stanchions, the inclusion of plush furniture, new didactic panels, etc. And I truly believe there are many possible answers to these questions today. And in our particular moment, and we are not bound by past modes of representation. So in the fall of 2024, we're going to invite visitors to trace the speculative contours of American art, its strictures and possibilities through these more inclusive lenses. And while we will not structure the experience of the collection to highlight the very real gaps and omissions, we will also not shy away from them. Rather, more like another set of very early patriots, we will spill the tea. And what we mean by that today is we will tell the truth. But we're going to do so in a way that prioritizes joy and seeks to minimize triggering experiences that other and traumatize our audiences. So I'm going to wrap up, and I want to speak about the second and final proposition that I introduced at the beginning of my talk, and that is radical care. When discussing the field-shaping work of Black Studies scholar and NYU professor Christina Sharp, Saidiya Hartman, herself a leader in the same field at Columbia, remarked, "Care is the antidote to violence." In my work with collections, I understand care as a framework that propels a desire for a radically different order. Hartman asked through her work what it would mean to have a social political order that is founded on isn't founded on settler colonialism, the erasure of indigenous people, history, and culture, and slavery, and racism, and anti-Blackness, and as we are persistently reminded, and just again this week, Black death. Hartman further elaborates in an interview that caring for ourselves and others is partly the way we destroy this social order and make another. We help each other inhabit what is an otherwise uninhabitable and brutal social context. And here I am, as Hartman is, thinking of the daily lived experiences of the most vulnerable in our society, those whose proximity to physical violence and premature death, as Ruth Gilmore has put it, is something they carry, marked on their body. And those bodies enter the museum. And I hope in 2024 they will enter the museum to experience something quite different. So what does that mean, to care for audiences, people, as much as we care for objects? How does a curator do that? There's, of course, another theoretical lecture about that, but since I've already given you a fair amount to think about, some philosophical musings to ponder, I'm going to zoom into the practical. Some of what care will look like in 2024 in the American art galleries will be more and more and more and more accessible seating. We heard in those focus groups that galleries need to have better access for people who have different abilities, and certainly I can understand we need more seating and we need greater access. Straightforward, easy to read wall text, user-friendly engagement tools, spaces that feel inviting, warm, rather than cold and objective, spaces that spark joy in their framing and fostering a sense of curiosity, spaces for being with others, spaces to meet, share ideas, and of course, to rest. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, recognizing that each visitor enters the museum with different expectations. Care is creating spaces that empower visitors to take what they need from their experience, even as that experience will look different from American art displays that they are used to. Success in the coming years, in my view, will look like the American wing filled with the people that you saw in the picture outside, which was actually during a protest for Black trans lives. But the museum has really become kind of a central core community, or a kind of a core symbol in our communities in Brooklyn. And to see those people come into the museum, not solely to see a special exhibition, but to visit and be in the space of the American galleries, is what success will look like for me. All ages, backgrounds, experiencing the collection through lenses that delight and inspire. Success is audiences continuing to question the answers that we and all museums are and have historically offered when defining and narrativizing American art. And over knowledge, and I've taught American art for many, many years. I like knowledge. I love the history. But I really hope that audiences will come away from this reinstallation with a deep sense of curiosity, and perhaps akin to our historical predecessors who were operating during a time in which Brooklyn feelings were just running amok, or being cultivated across this cultural landscape at the time. I hope audiences will feel cared for and a part of something greater than themselves, and of course, feel a sense of joy. Okay, you've all been so lovely. And this, as I said, was my very first public lecture, and I just want to end by saying I hope you will join us in this journey, and at each adventurous stop along the way. Your clear passion for the field and investment in its continued flourishing is truly unmatched, and I really look forward to welcoming this group in particular in the 2024 galleries. But I also really hope and look forward to the ways that these galleries might even surprise and delight and create new experiences for you with the historic works, perhaps landscapes in particular, that you so well know and love, because they're going to be in it, but they're not going to be where you perhaps expect them to be. If you're ever in Brooklyn, it would be our sincere pleasure to welcome you. Please be in touch. And I'll end there. Thank you. I would love to hear your thoughts and listen to your questions. I think we have a time for a few questions. I would love to hear your thoughts. I just threw a lot of stuff at you. Please, yes, Hudson.
So I'll try to make it as concise as possible. I would love to know more about your own personal process in being a curator, particularly for this show, because you've
that's a lot still.
What would you say is your criteria, like what speaks to you that makes you choose out that particular piece for this show?
That's such a good question. And the Brooklyn, I mean, I cited some numbers, but just a trove. Conservation was really not thrilled with us when I submitted checklists that were like, yes, like you said, over thousands of objects. But how we narrowed down the works, or how we're continuing to narrow down, because we're not finished yet, we're still doing the work, we're looking for several things. So we're really, really interested in bringing works out that have been never shown. So works, important works in the collection that hadn't had their opportunity to shine. And so a lot of works by previously marginalized artists, this includes a lot of light-sensitive works. We're creating new processes and structures for getting more of those works out in the galleries. So that's one way that we're looking, where are the works that our audiences really need to see. The second kind of criteria, or the way we're thinking about it, is really guided by these frameworks. It's been really fun to think about the collection, some of our iconic favorites, like the Bierstadt and like our coal paintings, and you know, a lot of our modern works, our Gilded Age painted ladies. Like, it's been so fun to kind of reimagine them in different spaces. And so often we're kind of taking a look at the frameworks, taking a look at these important pieces, and asking ourselves, where can we have a different conversation about these works? That's another way that we're making selections. And then the third really important way is we're making a lot of new acquisitions. Right, just this past year we completed, and I kind of hinted at it, an initiative for collecting, collection building strategy and acquisition of Asian American works. And so we have a lot of really, I can't tell you yet, but we have a lot of really exciting gifts coming in this spring, and we have a lot of really exciting acquisitions that we're making in the next 2 years leading up to the reinstallation that's going to completely transform our Asian American collection. We've already doubled it. And so those works will find new homes in the American collection, or in the American collections, but also the galleries. But it's hard, you know, like, it's really, really hard. Sadly, conservation is a huge deciding factor. A lot of the works we want to put on view, they need some love. And so, you know, those will hopefully get, you know, imagined, we'll create plans for how we can, you know, raise the money to get those included in these new frameworks. But often things are kind of ruled out because they're not exhibitable at this time. But thank you. We're constantly trying to, if you know how to make some selections, I'm willing to hear. It's hard. It's really hard. I want all the babies out. Yeah.
Keep up the work, because there are a lot of young people in this country from
Thank you.
you have a big one. And my studies were Native American.
Oh, fantastic.
I studied the tribes from tip of South America to Canada.
Oh, fantastic.
Hundreds of Native Americans lived in this continent.
Absolutely.
No longer have the rights they should have, along with your culture.
Yeah.
And a lot of us are here.
Of course, and I cannot wait. I am so eager to have a new colleague, our Indigenous Curator for American Art. We're right in the process, in the middle of hiring, and so I'm really looking forward to them partnering in this project. They will have their own galleries, of course, as they should, but I am really eager to hear how our Native American curator colleague who will come will, you know, I'm just excited to learn, but I'm curious to hear how they think the work should be incorporated into some of these frameworks that we're thinking of. Yeah. Betsy, please.
I love the example you gave of taking that Thomas Cole painting, view of Two Lakes and Mountain House, which shows the figure of Thomas Cole looking on this landscape right near here, and interpreting that in a way that takes his joy in seeing the landscape and expressing that joy from other cultures' traditions, right? I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but you know, his joy in the landscape was felt in other ways by other peoples. And I was wondering if you could give some more examples of that. You know, like how do you take something in a painting that is expressed in different ways by different cultures, and bringing those other perspectives in so that you see that original thing in a new context?
I'm gonna give you an answer that's probably maybe more entertaining than than actual, but because I really struggled with this lecture, y'all, because I could not, and we are not ready to share what the frameworks actually are. They're just not ready. They're still being workshopped. They're still being run through our internal process. But I want you to start thinking along the lines of the wild. And one of the examples that we constantly joke about in the department, we are not doing this, so don't worry, but horoscopes are wildly popular among a lot of everybody, honestly. They're all the rage. You should get your horoscope read. It's great. But a lot of people are really interested, like, all seriousness, really invested and interested in astrology and their horoscopes. And so imagine Thomas Cole in a gallery based on his horoscope. Like, that's wild, right? But also, I don't even, we could imagine the artist who he might be in conversation with, right? And so to see an artistic practice through an artist's astrology or through an artist like the month that they were born, I think would be a really exciting experience that I think would delight audiences. Don't worry, we're not doing that, that's why I shared it with you. But think kind of creatively and about the kinds of different orientations. And we would know, you all know everything about Thomas Cole, but have we thought about him in context of his birth month? What was he? Was he Scorpio? Capricorn? What? February. It was like Scorpio? What was he? Aquarius. See? They know. Thomas Cole was an Aquarius. Okay, so that would be really, for me, interesting. I'm totally nerding out. But so to answer your question, though, about joy and about experiencing these works, I always am thinking about my mother here because I've dragged her to so many galleries, and she's just not into it. But the reason she says is not because she doesn't like the art. It's because she feels stupid. That's what she says. My mom has many degrees, an MBA, she's a very smart woman. But there's some reason, and when I was younger, I had this really, just really jerk thing that I would, Mom, you just look at it. That's all you have to do, just look at it. But now I understand that actually comes from a deeper, phenomenological experience with the space that feels inaccessible to her somehow. And I've really thought about this for the last, 5-10 years, what it might mean for someone to experience a Cole work, but not feel shamed because they don't know what the Hudson River School is, right? Or, different painting styles. What if she encountered that Thomas Cole work within in a setting, in a context that is oriented towards her worldview, or something that she does readily understand or get, if that makes sense. So that's what we're going for. We'll see how it works. Other questions? Sorry, I think I see your hand and then one.
I'm struck by your walking that fine line between reverence and innovation. I think it's tempting to be iconoclastic, standing outside at what you would break up. I think it's much more interesting to try to respect the integrity of particular schools of art and to integrate them in a way. I thought your example about your mother was really perfect. Galleries can be daunting to people who are not used to, it's not part of their lexicon of their experiences.
Yeah.
So there's a much broader change that can come from this commitment, which is, stretching into education and other spheres where there's then a more accessible experience when you come to a museum. But I applaud your efforts. I just think it's so commendable.
Thank you.
Where does the change start? It starts right here.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm always telling my students that museums are a form, right? They're a very specific context. Museums don't have to be textbooks. At least all of us don't. If you want a textbook, you can read a textbook. Some museums, they'll be committed to that forever, and that's fine too. I think the field, especially the field for historic art, fields, in relation, well, I'll just speak for American art, but I do know that other colleagues in other historically oriented fields are feeling a crisis of relevance. I think that people are experiencing that, the only interest is in contemporary right now, and I really just think it's actually that our form, we need to reassess our form. Like what can museums do that an article can't? What can museums do that a textbook can't? Like how can these paintings be experienced, these sculptures, these prints, these photographs be experienced in ways that only they can be experienced in a museum? And that's where I want to go. I want to push the museum experience as far as the museum experience can go. We have books, like lots of ink is spilled on the Hudson River School. I love the Hudson River School. I love the paintings, but a lot of ink is spilled. What can we do as a museum that hasn't been done before? And that's kind of where I'm looking to go. I don't know the answers, but I hope to go. We'll see.
It sounds really exciting. And when you said the word wild, I automatically went to wilderness, and seeing wilderness as opposed to all the tidiness of, thank God for Thomas Cole. But you know what I'm saying? There's a religious quality about nature that Thomas Cole delivers. And I think, incorporating other views of nature that are wilder. And then, the idea of interactivity and more engagement on the experiential level is terribly exciting. I myself, I've been going to museums forever. And you quite often just kind of in a trance, go from one room
Love
to
that
the
you said
next.
that,
And,
yeah.
What we really want is like riveting experiences,
Yeah, and we can do that. Like, that's the thing. I think we can do that. But I love that you said trance, because I often call it the procession, where the people kind of just walk through the gallery. I do it too. I'm actually looking at lights, and I'm looking at mounts and things now, which is terrible. It's like what becoming a curator does to you. But no, it is. In like a trance-like kind of way, people kind of just peruse the American galleries as they wait for their special exhibition ticket to like come up, which I really want people to stay. I want them to return. I want the American art galleries to be a destination. I want it to be all over Instagram. I want like people to feel excited to be in the space. Like I just want fun, I embrace all of that. So yeah, I'm excited for you to see it, and I hope you will reach out and let me know if we've done it, if we've accomplished it. I don't know if we have any more time for questions. Are we done?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, my interest is piqued to the max. So anybody who'd like to join the 3:30 tour, go ahead to the back. Otherwise, we're going to all crowd around you and have more of our questions. So thank you all so much for coming.